Good morning, everyone. I'll call the meeting to order. This is the meeting of the Stationary Source Committee. We have at remote locations Supervisor Perez, and the chair of this committee, Ben Benoit, will be about 10 minutes late, so we will turn the meeting over to him as he arrives. So let's get started. First item is a proposed amendment to Rule 301, and we have a report from Phil Fine on that. No, we have a report from Sarah.
Sarah?
Reese.
Oh, okay.
Good morning, I'm Sarah Reese. So what we have here is a proposed amended Rule 301, which we were just talking about, but this is a very minor amendment, a provision that we have to do. Recently, EPA called to our attention that there's a provision in the Clean Air Act that requires when facilities submit emission reports that these reports have to be certified, that they're complete and accurate to the best knowledge of the facility. We didn't have that requirement in 301. EPA called that to our attention, and so we're proposing to add a provision in 301 to include that requirement. As a practical matter, these facilities are already making these certification statements, so it doesn't really have any impact. This is extremely administrative in nature, and it will have no additional cost impact. So, and then upon approval of this amendment, we would be looking to submit this provision to CARB to be incorporated into the SIN. So that's all we have going on. Happy to answer any questions on that.
So it says no motion required, but then it says we're supposed to adopt a resolution determining the proposed amendment to Rule 301.
So, Mayor Mitchell, may I
Yes,
respond?
please go ahead.
The action item before the governing board will be to determine the CEQA exemption and adopt the rule amendment. But it's been our position that the committee does not actually make motions on the rules because we're supposed to take our position after we've heard all public testimony.
I see.
So the committees routinely do not take positions to recommend for or against a rule, but the action item will be at the governing board.
Okay, so we'll take some public testimony here, and then this will be forwarded to the governing board. Okay, got it. Is there any public testimony on this item?
Harvey Etter would like to comment.
Oh, Mr. Etter, please come forward. How many minutes does how do you need it, Harvey? How many will it take on this?
Again, I don't know, how many items are there?
There's two main items, and then there's written comments.
Well, I guess I'll take a minute.
1 minute on this item?
Maybe I'll up this to extend to a minute now. My name is Harvey Etter. I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition. I'm concerned about EQA exception. I don't know exactly what's covered. It sounds like could be pretty significant legal implications for what's covered and what is not. And again, I'm thinking towards solar implementation, solar conversion. And I have been approached by staff in the past in reference to that. So I've got concerns, and I'm not really up on what's happening here. So I'm opposed to taking any action that's going to not continue with CEQA and to really characterize and itemize in everything that's done on site. So what's available on site, near site, other properties they own or whatnot, and for looking at putting solar on or near or district systems.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Etter, for your comments. Any other public comment on this item? Any public comment in remote locations? Seeing none, we will forward this matter to the governing board for further action. Okay, we'll go to item 2. This is update on Rule 1118, refinery flares, and we have Michael Krause. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning. Yes, my name is Mike Krause. I'm a planning rules manager here at the AQMD. Okay, so I'm here to give you an update on our Rule 1118. This deals with controlled emissions at refinery flares. Okay, So by way of background, we adopted this rule back in 1998. Its intent was to monitor the quantity as well as the composition of flare gassing at refineries. We wanted to improve on our inventory there and also assess potential for future controls. Our last event was back in 2017. We did a number of things. We harmonized with some EPA rules. We removed this cap that we had on mitigation fees. We updated some emission factors. But more importantly, we sort of did a focus on the notification process, translating that into a more web-based application, which we'll talk about in a moment. We also sent out an RFI, that means request for information, for some technologies that deal with remote sensing, and I'll address that in a second. And then they submitted some scoping plans. And this update is to comply with a resolution language to come out and give you an update on this implementation. So I'll be focusing on these three topic areas. First up, remote sensing. So just as a reminder, remote sensing, of course, means that you are trying to acquire information from a distance that without an actual physical contact. So most of the time you see that in satellites and things like that. We're trying to do the same when it comes to these flares. Because the flares are usually at a great height, there's the nature of an open flare. It's not always an easy thing that we would have to, be able to do a reading on. So therefore, remote sensing makes sense. We're trying to capture and understand the emissions coming out when it comes to nitrogen oxides, sulfur oxides, as well as volatile organic compounds from the flares. These are typically calculated right now by looking at the flare throughput, as well as some default emission factors. So the remote sensing, however, will give us opportunities to get real-time emission data from those flares. We released this RFI back in 2017. We got about 7 companies that responded. We took a look at some of that information and looking to see if there's some potential for further field demonstration. To do that, we would have to send out a request for proposal and things like that. And of course, we would come back to the board with those ideas. But more importantly, the data that we would receive could help us give us insight on how we can possibly do some future modifications to the rule or a program. Oh, and by the way, this would also be in concert with some of our efforts that we're doing under Assembly Bill 617, going out there with these community emission reduction plans, or SERPs, where there's been some real interest in flaring. Okay.
I'm going to stop for a minute.
Sure.
Could you describe how this optical remote sensing technology works? For my
So with the sense of remote sensing, we talked about how you're getting this information remotely. When it comes to optical, typically these are like infrared sensors that are being sent out over the flare. Right now, the infrared sensors are able to measure heat. Okay, and that's an important element to measure. You also need infrared sensors because they can detect motion as well. So those are some of the things that we more commonly would be familiar with. But what happened to my graph? Oh, okay, all right, that's fine. I'll just wing it. We did look at a number of different technologies. I said 7 companies had sent us stuff, so I wanted to focus in on a couple of those. The first one is that infrared flare parameter, they call it, and that gives back real-time data on this combustion efficiency. So again, reading in the heat, and that enables us to kind of say, what the intensity of that flares and how we can, and that has a direct correlation to the emission. So if we can determine what that destruction efficiency is coming from that flare and can make modifications to those, that could then result in reductions. But this particular type of technology does not quantify emissions. So just to make it clear there. And there's some cost to that one. That would be about $10,000 per sensor. There's another one called the video imagining, whatever it is, spectrophotometer. I'm not a monitor guy. Yes.
It's supposed to be imaging.
Imaging. They call it visor, I believe is the expression that they use. This one actually EPA is interested in, and we've been in conversations with them, and they actually are looking to do some test studies down here, actually in South Coast region. This is region 5, by the way, that's interested, and that's the Midwest region for US EPA. So we've been talking to the folks out there in Chicago. Again, this similar to the first one. This is giving us some real-time feedback with regards to combustion efficiency, and this one looks like about $40,000 per week for demonstration. on those. And the last one we wanted to highlight here was what they call the dial systems, differential absorption LiDAR. This one, however, does do a quantitative analysis. It is able to quantify emissions, and not just on the hydrocarbons, the volatile organic compounds, but also possibly on some toxics as well. Now, this type of technology, however, would need to actually be constructed. So there would be a lot higher cost on that. There's been this discussion of maybe sizing it down to more of a mini, what they call mini dial, could be about the size of a van, that could be deployed. We estimate for about a 2-year demonstration project would be about 3.5 million, but there's a lot of good things with that. Phil, did you want to add anything on this technology?
No, I think that covers it. We're still looking into whether we should do an RFP or collaborate with others to get some of these out in the field.
So that's $3.5 million for a 2-year pilot.
Yes, that's a
That's
very
right.
expensive technology.
And if, suppose it's successful, what do you think it would cost to implement something like that?
It would, the equipment itself is probably close to $1 million each or more, depending if they, how they downsize it.
Is that flare specific or is it facility specific?
That would be,
Flare specific.
it would be per
Per
piece of
flare.
equipment and how many flares that one piece of equipment can handle.
Yeah.
Might be more than one per facility.
How many facilities?
Well, there are 5 major refineries in the region. Yeah. There are some other ones with flares, but I'm not quite sure if we, go down that road because, well, anyway, whether it be cost effective or whether we would be, concerned about their level of emissions. Okay. So that's remote sensing. The next up is flare notifications. Okay, also in our rule, all right, there we go, thank you, Paul. Paul likes shooting the camera at us, so. Okay, so in flare notifications, back again in the 2017 rule amendment, we actually required notifications if they can be done via a web-based application, like I mentioned. This would allow the refineries to report their flaring events. And one of the things that the refineries are interested in is knowing they could do this remotely. So we were looking at ways, again, being web-based or being like a mobile source device, mobile phones. So we were kind of looking in those different areas. We also thought it was important, of course, that the community gets access to this level of data. As we mentioned, again, consistent with the interest of the folks in the 617 world. This data would then be compiled with regards to not just the flare emissions or each flare event. You can then actually view and hold the frequency of those things occurring, the dates, the timing, the duration, locations, things like that. So overall, we were looking at improving this functionality, providing more information and informing the public. Okay, now, what do we decide to call this? So, Flare Event Notification System, or Fens. We're going to make it work. Okay, in creating this program, we wanted to meet both with the refineries and the public, solicit their input. We also think that as we kind of go through this process, we then decided to do it in different phases. So it'd have an initial phase, and then some of the ideas we could actually do at a later date, especially when we need some financing or budgeting and time to make that programming happen. The other interest, of course, is for both ends is to come back and have some kind of training. Obviously, we need to train the refineries. They're the ones that would be actually using the Fens system when reporting their flare events, but also to get interest from what the public is seeking and the type of information that they would like to see. And one of the big things that rose there was the reason why something is flaring. A lot of times they just don't know. So we wanted to make sure that we made that part of the system. So we also designed, again, to do for ease. So if they were off-site or they were able to utilize it on their phones, that would be helpful. And finally, again, to help complement the efforts that are being made in the 617 world. If you're not familiar with that, they have raised issues of being notified, or what are we doing to reduce or minimize flare events, and how much is that data available for public consumption.
So Michael, let me interrupt just for a moment.
Sure.
Because our chair has arrived. Good morning, Chair Van Benoit.
Good morning.
And I'll turn it over to you. I've been sort of presiding here for waiting for you to appear. So, good morning.
I appreciate it, and thank you. I was actually listening on via YouTube on my drive in, so thank you for doing such a good job. Does that conclude the presentation item there? Or?
No.
While we're on that slide though, while you're talking about
Sure.
the flare and getting the information out, if I could just ask, one way I think that maybe we ought to think about is our app. Could that not be a portion of the app where they could turn on and off alerts for various locations or refineries? I wonder if that might be something we could put into that.
Yes,
Yes.
Ron's nodding his head yes.
we've actually done.
Very good. Please continue. Thank you for allowing me to join.
You bet. So unfortunately, Mayor Benoit, because you're in a remote location, you're not able to get our fancy little fact sheet on Fens. However, we'll make sure we'll get you one. This provides for the general public an insight of what's coming, a little background again for them, and more importantly, what we call the public portal. So this will be the venue by which the public will be able to go into this application. And let me give you a little quick showing here. This is a screenshot of what we're planning to do, create a map. So we sort of came up with this idea. I hate to use this reference, but during CAL FIRE, remember when we had all the fires across the state? CAL FIRE came up with that interesting map. You had a little flame or whatever, and you click it, and it would talk about the location of the fire, when that fire got started, how many acres were burned, when they think that's going to be extinguished, et cetera. So we were kind of thinking on the same. Here we would identify each of the refinery flares subject to this rule. They'd be normally in a blue dot on a map. However, if there was a flare event, that blue dot would turn red. And the public will be able to click on, they can click on the blue dot, by the way, and get information about the refinery and also past and upcoming events for when it comes to flares. But when it hits the blue, it hits the red dot, then they actually have the current flare information as well that's happening. So we really thought that was important. As consistent with the rule, we still have notification procedures like we do currently in the rule. And again, that will continue on. So subscribers to the site will be able to again receive an email if and when a flare event is beginning to occur. But they can access this site at any time and look again at past events. They can look at upcoming events that are going. Upcoming events is because a number of times they have planned events and they submit that information to us as well as required by the rule. Finally, it was raised that what happens at some of these locations when there's something possibly else happening, something else that's happening big at the refinery. Like to take, for example, the Phillips 66 fire that occurred a couple months ago. A lot of times folks may come to this particular map, getting used to it and seeing the accessibility of information. So if we happen to have that additionality information, like we did with the Phillips 66, where we had that notification, we had detail from our compliance team, we had something up online, we're gonna have an additional access to link them, give them the link to that additional information. So we want to use this as sort of a conduit of more than just a little bit more in the flaring if something else is happening at that site. Okay, the last element is scoping plans. So the refiners were required to submit scoping plans to us. In those plans, we were looking at alternative ways that they could reduce their emissions, alternative to flaring. We thought we could use some of these ideas in the next phase round of rulemaking. We did notice some similarities between the refineries in those documents, and we definitely noticed that some of their issues that they raise is about cost, as you could imagine, and of course the time to make these transitions. They wanted to make sure that voice was heard. When looking at some of those emission reduction efforts, notice that the cost of controls could be something administrative or processy, which are good things sometimes, right? Those could be as low as, let's say, a cost of $16,000 to the refinery, all the way up to if they were going to alternatively use the gases for, let's say, electric generation, could be upwards of 100 million. So we definitely concluded that power generation and transmission would be least cost effective for them. However, most cost effective actually could just be vapor recovery. Now their challenges with vapor recovery is that a lot of it, they don't have that already established. Vapor recovery just means that instead of taking that gas, sending it up to the flare, you would then capture that and then send that off to, let's say, a tank or some other place where it could get settled and be reused. They would need space, and there's constraints and things like that for that. So that's one of the other areas that we looked into on the scoping plan. So we're going through that sort of process. We want to kickstart our working groups to start having more conversations. But I wanted to highlight you a couple things that we thought that could be considered in that upcoming rulemaking. Not to sway your opinion. just to kind of give you information. Increased recovery of that refinery flare, potentially having backup power systems, reducing planned events. You know, unplanned events and emergency events, those are going to be a little more challenging, obviously. But if you're already planning and knowing you're going to be doing something, a maintenance or what have you, that you're going to have to potentially flare, you have the ability, we believe, to think that through beforehand and to do something beneficial. And then, of course, finally, work on this optical remote sensing to get better efficiency rates, destruction rates. Those can be ways in which they can make some changes, and we can reduce emissions. So, next steps, we want to, of course, release the Fens notification system. Then we want to work with EPA about some of their interest in doing demonstrations. We want to get back to working groups to talk about those elements in the scoping plan, and then hopefully get back to the board next year with a possibly amended rule.
Could you elaborate on Region 5 versus OAQPS?
Well, they had contacted us on that. They haven't really given us an answer why they're interested, but we weren't going to disencourage them either. But we'll be working with them.
We've done some past work on like defense line monitoring and remote sensing with Office of Research and Development at EPA. So those are different.
It makes
office.
sense.
Yeah.
I'm just curious why Region 5, Chicago, Midwest, as opposed to Region 9, Region 6, or
They
8.
contacted us.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, this is an area that's that includes like Illinois, Ohio, right? So there's going to be refineries there. Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan. Okay, that concludes.
All right,
presentation.
very good. Do we have public comment on this item?
Mr. Chair, I do have a question, if I could.
Oh, sure.
Um,
Please go ahead.
It does say in your report that scoping documents were due by July 7, 2018, so you received some already, or was that postponed?
Yes, we have received
You have
those.
received them.
Yeah, we've had some staffing change
Okay.
around to not get us be able to sit down with those right away, but we have now looked at those and we've mapped.
Okay, that's just what I wondered, what the status was on that, and is it successful?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
The contents are different, of course, for each of the refineries, but I think we're leaving enough information to kickstart those working groups.
And right now, I get email notifications for every flare event.
Yes, and you would continue.
That would continue, but there'll be more information in it, I'm assuming,
That's
under
right.
this program.
That's right. And links to that page, so it'd be really easy for people to get that notification, possibly just go right to that link and.
Okay, and then but what we're anticipating is that when there is a flare event, we'll actually see what the emissions are under, the optimal situation in $3.5 million.
That's phase.
Yes.
After my death.
That's the goal, but it's going to take a while to get to
Yeah,
that
okay.
point.
All right, okay, thank you.
No problem.
Very good. Any other board member questions?
No.
If not, we'll take public comment.
We have one public comment from Harvey Eder. That's all, I only have one card. I don't see anyone else, right? How much time do you want, Mr. Eder?
Right, about a
You have a
minute and a
left?
half.
Minute and a half.
Hi, I'm Harvey Eder. I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition, and for those 80-90% of the people that want to see equitable, just solar transition ASAP. There's a question about several questions here. I know this relates to low carbon fuel standards and flaring, and the credit for renewable natural gas gets it for just emitting it into the atmosphere versus flaring it. Most they should only get credit for flaring numbers, and preferably for putting it in the ground. There's questions with that, and what they've done with low carbon fuel standards is outrageous. It basically outcompetes solar electric trucks, vehicles, whatnot, and it's got to be stopped. This whole renewable natural gas thing has got to be stopped. So for flares, okay, for remote sourcing, is EMF being used for this in their environmental impacts? And from radiation precedent has been set by EPA and the state with radon gas. This is going to be looked through also with 5G and the district and all this stuff they're talking about, security trade-offs and whatnot. Pardon?
That is expired.
All right, there's big problems in River City.
Thank you, Harvey, for your comments again. And go ahead, Chairman Bernard.
Thank you. Any other board member comments? If not, great presentation and thank you. It's interesting to see that moving forward. We have our 2 written reports that are attached. Any board member questions on those items or public comment? If not, we have any other business by the board? Not hearing any general public comment?
General public comment here in CCA.
Saying yes.
Mr. Etter would like to comment again.
Mr. Etter.
It's me, for us, ditto. Again, I want to go back to this stationary source theme and to kill the dragon one last time. What Dr. Fine and I have been sparring on this for half a decade before the board and whatnot. That what you get, emissions you get reduced from stationary sources are just not from stationary sources. I'm saying that you can only get 2-3 tons of NOx reduced by converting all of the electric plants to solar electric. I said, but wait a sec, if we go like BYD and these other manufacturers we're dealing with to solar electric vehicles, then the numbers we can hit 100 times that and meet the actual federal and state law requirements. It's the only way we're going to meet it. And what you're doing now is self-destructive, and the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, we're both doing that, but we're right and you're wrong. Nan.
You spell that.
Oh my gosh. Thank you.
Wayne, do you have a response?
I do not. Thank you for the opportunity, though, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any other public comment? If not, our next meeting will be Friday, July 26th. And thank you all. And my apologies for running a little late. I had a 10 o'clock meeting down in Temecula I had to attend. Left there early to be here. So thank you. Everyone, have a good weekend. And for those of us on the Refinery Committee, we'll have a great Saturday.